Hello everyone, and welcome to Psychology 4440, the Psychology of Drugs and Behavior. This is an online course, and this is just a welcome video. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what this course is for, what the course is about, what the expectations are, where you can find certain kinds of information, what the assignments will be like for the course, and a little bit about content. And then this week, this first week of the course will be sort of also an introduction. And you can find that material in the same course content section on Blackboard. So I'm your instructor. I am Dr. Damon Tomlin. I'll say a little bit more about myself here in a minute. But first I want to talk about the course itself. And what this course is about is drugs and the effects of psychoactive drugs that we'll be looking at a variety of levels. So, for example, drugs have an effect certainly biologically, but as we'll see, they also have an effect psychologically, they have an effect on behavior, and they have an effect on society. And we'll look at all of those elements as the course goes on. One of the simplest levels at which drugs have an effect is that of neurons, so individual brain cells. So we'll talk about what neurons are, how they work, how drugs affect them, and what those effects are. How do they change how neurons function? But those neurons are the basic building block of the brain. And so it's important as we move forward to understand how the brain works to the extent that we understand that, and what how neurons respond to drugs, which it turns out are just chemicals. From there, we'll move on to individual effects. So we can understand how drugs have an effect on neurons, but affecting a single cell or a group of cells doesn't always indicate how it's going to affect the individual. And so we'll talk about that as well. How is the individual's brain affected as a whole? And of course, the brain, because it produces behavior, if you affect the brain with a drug, odds are you'll affect the physiology or affect the behavior of the whole individual. And so we'll come to understand a little bit about how that process works, why certain drugs have the effects they do with regard to our experience and our behavior. We'll go even bigger picture and look at society and the role that drugs play in how society functions. Not just our society, although we'll certainly focus on a society in the United States, but other societies as well, especially societies throughout history. So how are individuals that use drugs, and here I don't just mean illicit drugs. Drug use has a negative connotation that one of the things I want to do with this course is get away from that, is try to understand in a sort of critical sense. When we say drug use, that means any drug, and there are a lot of drugs, not just illicit ones. But when a person uses a drug, especially an illicit one, what effect does that have on society? How does that affect society, and how has society responded to the presence and the use of drugs? Now, we'll also dip a little bit into history. What is the history of drug use? What is the history of regulation of drugs? As we'll see, regulation of drugs is a fairly new phenomenon. For the vast majority of our history, drugs were not regulated, and there are a number of naturally occurring drugs that have been around for thousands of years. And it's only recently that we have things like drug regulations. But we're not just talking about the law, we're talking about how different cultures viewed drugs, how they used drugs. So we'll get a little bit into that historical perspective as well. So that's what the course is about in terms of topic. In terms of objectives, there are a couple things I want you to take away from this course. First, obviously, is the effect of individual drugs. So we'll spend a lecture or a whole week on each class of drugs. Sometimes more than that. We'll talk about alcohol repeatedly, for example. Alcohol is a big topic. It's the most widely used drug in the U.S. But that's just one drug. We'll talk about lots of different kinds of drugs. Some familiar ones like nicotine, cannabis, maybe some less familiar ones. Certain kinds of amphetamines, for example, we'll go over. Performance-enhancing drugs. there are lots of different chemicals out there that affect how neurons function, how the brain functions, and how the person behaves. So we'll look at each individual group of drugs and talk about what makes that class of drugs a class. Why is that a group worth discussing? We'll talk about prevention and treatment. So how do we prevent drug abuse? And how do we treat drug abuse once it already occurs? So these are important concepts. Some approaches have worked better than others. Some approaches seem to be more scientifically valid than others. So we'll talk about different kinds of prevention and treatment programs and the pros and cons for each of those. The biggest picture item that I want you to take away from this course are critical thinking skills. So I alluded just a few minutes ago to the idea that when we say drug use, that has a negative connotation. But the fact is that most people in the U.S. are drug users. As soon as you take an aspirin, you are using a drug for a particular purpose. When we say drug user, we tend to mean illicit drug use or drug abuse of some sort. The term drug user is a label that has those negative connotations. But here, again, we want to think of drugs as chemicals. That's what they are. They're molecules. So they affect how neurons function. They affect how the brain works. And so when we talk about drugs, we're going to try and take an even-handed perspective. We're not going to say that drugs are universally bad. We're also not going to say they're universally good. So there's been a lot of talk over the last few decades about the benefits of psychoactive drugs. And certainly there are some benefits for certain classes of drugs, but almost any drug has a potential benefit, but also a potential harm. And so we're not going to ignore either side of that. And a lot of these have controversial issues that go along with them. And so we'll hopefully engage some of those critical thinking skills and develop them as we talk about these controversial issues. Whether it's about the usefulness of a drug, the usefulness of a drug prevention or treatment program, how good an idea a given set of regulations is. So these are all potentially controversial topics, and so we'll evaluate them. There are pros and cons on both sides. It's important to be aware of them, and it's important to be able to craft an argument. Which side do you think is the more correct side, and why do you think that? So a lot of this course is about researching those issues and looking at facts on both sides of a given issue. Prerequisites for the course. Technically, there aren't any prerequisites. I recommend that you've had Psychology 1000, Introduction to Psychology. I do not absolutely require it. If you're concerned or worried that maybe you don't have the background to do well in the course, by all means, send me an email. I'll put up my email address here in just a minute. But let me know, and we can talk about your concerns, talk about whether this class is a good fit for you.
So first, a bit about me. I'm your instructor. My name is Dr. Damon Tomlin, and I will be your instructor for this entire course. I'm looking forward to teaching it. I hope you're looking forward to taking it. And this is my email address, dtomlin@uccs.edu. So if you need to get a hold of me, please send an email to that address. Likewise, if I need to get a hold of you, whether it's a class level announcement or an email to you individually, I will also use your UCCS email address. So please, if you don't check that frequently, please start doing so for the duration of this course, because important information will be sent to that email account. If you send me an email, please give me 24 hours to respond. I am very diligent about checking email, about getting back to you, but sometimes looking up an answer, especially if it's something to do with departmental policy, that can take a little time. So please just send one email and wait 24 hours. I promise I will get back to you. This is my office. It is on the 4th floor of Columbine. So it is in the section for the psychology department if you need to find me in person. Again, if you want to meet me in person, shoot me an email first. I do not have set office hours for this course. My office hours are by appointment. So this course is online, and it is asynchronous, which means it is sort of up to your schedule. So since you're not on any particular schedule to absorb course material, I'm not going to give you a particular schedule to meet with me. Uh, if you send me an email, we can work out a time that works for both of us, where we can meet in person. And of course, email may suffice for clearing up questions or for any other issues that may come up for you. But if you do want to meet me in person, just send me an email and we will set up an appointment at my office.
Course materials. So first, I've posted the syllabus for the course on Blackboard. So this is a picture of the left menu bar from Blackboard, and you'll see one of those items is syllabus. So that is where you can find a PDF of the syllabus. It has course requirements, due dates, expectations, objectives, all the sort of things you expect to find in the syllabus. So be sure to look at that. That will give you an overview of the course and an overview of the course schedule, especially those big assignments that will come up periodically. The textbook. The textbook is Hart and Cassier's Drug Society and Human Behavior. This course will use the 16th edition. So I know there may be copies of the 15th edition floating around somewhere. People have used that successfully in the past. The content is pretty much the same by the time you get to the 16th edition of a book. The material is more or less settled. What will change are things like the figures and the page numbers, for example. So in the syllabus, chapters are according to the 16th edition. So be sure and be aware of that. Material should be more or less the same between the 15th and 16th, so if you need to use the 15th. I would, of course, recommend using the 16th. That's the version I'll be using for class. Technology. So this is an online course. There are some technological requirements for you to succeed in the course. So first, you'll need speakers or headphones. Presumably, you're using those already if you're watching this. So most computers come with at least internal speakers, if not external speakers, and headphones are pretty common. But you'll need those to be able to hear lectures. So lectures will have visual content as well as auditory content. So be sure you can hear me. You'll need programs to be able to read Word documents and write them, and PDFs. So I post the lecture slides in the form of PDFs so you can access them. And Word documents, you'll need to be able to write and submit. So you'll have two papers during this course, and both of them should be submitted either in Word format or PDF format. I'm not a Mac user, so I do not have access to Pages, so please do not submit any assignments in Pages format, just Word or a PDF. Also, to work with Blackboard successfully, you'll probably need Microsoft Silverlight. I don't explicitly have any materials in the course that depend on Silverlight, but Blackboard has some plugins that require it. So be sure you have that. If Blackboard works for you, then you probably already got it. Browsers. So I myself use Chrome, and I don't usually have any problems. But historically, using Blackboard, Mozilla Firefox seems to have the fewest problems. So if you have a problem, a browser problem with Blackboard, you might want to try using Firefox if you're not already. That can solve some compatibility issues with other browsers. And then finally, this is not going to come up anytime soon, but the midterm and final exams for this class will require the Respondents Lockdown browser. So this is different from Firefox. Firefox will be good for watching lecture content and downloading material. Respondents Lockdown is a browser it's a simple browser, but it keeps one window open for the exam. You can't have multiple windows. Both exams are closed book, closed note. So you can't have other windows open for class material. So the Blackboard system will require that you use the Respondents Lockdown browser. Okay, how is the course structured? What are the requirements like from week to week? So it is an online course. It's entirely online. There is no classroom component of this course. And it uses Blackboard. Obviously, you know that you're watching this lecture. It is asynchronous, as I mentioned. That means that there's not a required time to sit in on lecture or sit in on discussion. It is entirely up to you when you log into Blackboard and view material, or contribute to class. However, new material accumulates every week, and there is a weekly discussion. So it's asynchronous up to a point. You have to participate. You have to be involved in the course every week. Within the week, the scheduling is up to you. The class is composed of modules, and these modules will be found under course content, which you can click on the left side of your Blackboard window. So under course content, you'll see a module for that week. I post the modules at the beginning of each week, usually on Sunday evening. So be on the lookout for that. This is the first week, so this is the welcome video. Obviously, you've already found course content, but there will also be additional content this week for our class time lectures. Each module will contain an overview and a list of tasks, a to-do list. So these will be things like learning objectives, and also things that need to be turned in, for example, or participating in weekly discussion. So that will be at the beginning of each module. The readings will be also listed on the syllabus as well as in the overview. So I recommend that you do the assigned reading prior to watching lecture. That way you'll be familiar with the material when you sit in and watch lecture. So in lectures, I go a little more in depth than the book does. Sometimes I'll cover things that aren't in the book. But if you read the book first, at least you'll be familiar with the material for that week, some of the concepts that are key for that week. Lectures, so I will usually post 2 lectures a week. They are through Blackboard, so you should be able to see them under course content, under each module. You'll see a couple of lectures. They'll look like little YouTube videos, that's what they are. And so you can watch those. Be sure to, again, to have speakers or headphones so you can hear me, but I will present the slides through that video format. I will also post the slides as PDFs when I post those modules, so you can see the slides and print them out if you like. There will also be practice quizzes, and these are not taken for a grade. I don't look at your quiz results. You don't have to take the quiz at all if you don't want to. But these are little exams, little mini exams, just a few questions to see how well you retained material from lecture or from the book. And so these are just a few questions that will test your knowledge, and if you have trouble with them, it's a good sign. Maybe go back and do the reading again or watch lecture again. So they're just for your benefit. I don't grade them. I don't collect them. I don't check up on them. So I will post them every week, and it is up to you to use them or not. One thing that is required is what we call the discussion board. And the discussion board has 2 sections to it. One is just questions that you can post about class content, class structure, and these are just questions for me. Everyone can see them. Odds are if you have a question about class content, someone else does too. So your questions will be public, and I'll get to them as soon as I can and answer questions about assignments, or paper-related questions, questions about topics. If there was an idea you didn't understand from lecture, that's where you can ask that question, and I'll answer it. The other part of discussion board is our weekly discussion, and that is where I will post a question, and then it's up to you to answer it. And these are not yes or no, these are not right or wrong type questions. These are, again, trying to engage those critical thinking skills. These will be controversial questions. I want to see your opinion. I want to see how you've evaluated the material you've seen and what you think. And again, these will not be easy questions. These will not be questions with a concrete answer. You'll have to do some thinking about them, and then write a paragraph about your response to the question. And again, the discussion board, that I do grade. That is evaluated. That's part of your grade. Participating at all, but also the quality of the response. So when you comment, you can't just say great question, or if you respond to someone else's comment, which you're welcome to do, you can't just say good comment and call it a day. So you need to respond to the question, answer it, with a reasonable paragraph, something that shows you've thought about the question and you've got some thoughts on it. So those are part of your grade, and those will be every week. Every week we'll have a couple of questions, and you only need to respond to one of the questions, but you do need to respond every week. For the first couple of weeks, the questions will be individually answered, so you'll just post your own comment in response to that question. After a few weeks, we'll reorganize and I'll put you into discussion groups. And this is a way for you to bounce ideas off of each other before you post. So it will no longer just be a post of your individual thoughts. You'll have to discuss this as a group and come to some sort of consensus. Or if there's not a consensus, explain what the two sides of the issue are. So again, you'll work as a group as opposed to an individual and hopefully come up with a more comprehensive response. Maybe something you hadn't thought of before that a group member suggests that will help you create your response to the discussion that week. So that's the discussion board again. You have the two sections, in-class content and our weekly discussion group. The latter is required, the former is not, but feel free to ask questions or check it to see if there are things that you weren't aware of about the course. So feel free to do that. Other information, so in terms of where your grade comes from, this is in the syllabus as well, but there will be a midterm exam that's worth a quarter of your grade. It will happen halfway through the semester, and that will be a test that's administered through Blackboard. And again, you'll need the Respondus Lockdown browser for that. We'll talk more about the exams as they approach. There's also a final exam. It is not cumulative, so that it will cover the second half of the course. It will be very similar in format to the midterm. You'll have two papers. The first will be what we call a summary paper, and that is where you'll pick a topic. I'll provide a list of topics. You'll pick a topic, and the topic will be a particular kind of drug, and you'll write a paper about it. What's the history of that drug? What does the drug do physiologically? What does drug treatment and prevention look like for that kind of drug? Again, this is an assignment when it comes closer, we'll talk more about, but that is worth 20% of your grade. The second paper, toward the end of the course, will be an argument paper. So instead of summarizing a drug in a variety of domains about its efficacy, its effects, controversy surrounding the drug, that's for the summary paper. The argument paper, I'll give you a controversial issue, and you will have to pick one side of that issue and defend it. So you'll explain why you think your position is the correct one. You'll bring up evidence in support of your position, explain why the other position isn't as strong, but consider both sides, and you take a position, you make an argument. And again, we're going to engage those critical thinking skills. And then 10% of your grade is that discussion contribution. So contributing to discussion every week, whether as an individual or as part of a group, and you'll be responding to those questions that I post every week. And then finally, if you have an accommodation to this course, please let me know as soon as you can. If you have any form of impairment, or if you get extra time on an exam, if you have special accommodations, please let me know, and I will do my best to accommodate that. Okay, well that will do it for the overview of the course. So welcome to the course. Again, we will have lecture content this week, so be on the lookout for that under course content, under the first module. So there will be 2 lectures. And for those, we'll go over what a drug is, sort of the broad overview and introduction to what drugs are, some of the terminology we're going to use, as well as the history of drugs, a little bit in this country, but mainly globally. And so that will be this week's topic. And as I said, syllabus is online, so you can see it under Blackboard if you're curious about what the layout of the course is in terms of which weeks correspond to which topics. So I will talk to you later this week then.